I worked for 47 years for BT. Most of those, I was a statistician or something akin to that, doing kind of operations research kinds of things. So I gave this sort of a talk when I was leaving BT last year, and it attracted a lot of interest. So I was asked to make a version for the QIS. So I went to Queen Mary College, University of London. I initially uh, wanted to study pure mathematics. I had an illusion that basically pure mathematics was rigorous and applied mathematics was much less rigorous, and pure mathematics was much more beautiful. It turned out I wasn't the most astonishing mathematician, and I would say my purity probably was in doubt as well. But I ended up doing mostly applied maths, and I avoided statistics completely. I wasn't at all interested in statistics. It struck me as a collection of ad hoc uh, tools, which are kinds of rules of thumb, useful, but nothing particularly interesting or elegant in the way I was looking for in mathematics. In my second year, a disaster struck, and my best friend was killed in a railway accident, and I kind of went off the rails. The first year I passed all my courses. I was doing well. But second year I went into a deep depression, and I screwed up my exams. I ended up leaving in 1977 without a degree, so not a good start. So I thought, oh, I'll get a job, and I get a temporary job, nice job, just to tide me over while I retake my exams. So I took a job as a telecommunications traffic officer with a post office telecommunications. I didn't really know what that was. I found out there was an awful lot of competition for the job, and I said to them, well, "Why did you pick me?" And they said, "Well, you've got computer science A level, you've got Fortran, you can program. Now that's really important to us here because we've just lost the guy who writes all our programs, and you've got a sense of humor." I said, "How did you know I had a sense of humor?" And they said, "Well, you didn't have any jobs before this, so you had a couple of summer jobs, and in 1973 you were the donut king on South Sea seafront, according to the form, and under reason for leaving you put sick of donuts." Well, when you're leafing through large numbers of applications, all of which are rather boring, a belly laugh makes a difference. I was memorable. So they decided I had a good sense of humor and I had the skills they wanted. So I ended up forecasting telephone traffic, which was measured in Erlangs, which is the unit of occupancy of circuits, for the telecommunications region. And they were forecasting, do we need to build capacity for exchanges? Is the telephone traffic going up fast enough? When do we need to schedule extending each telephone exchange in London? So they had that was the 7 years ahead forecast, but they also did a 30 years ahead forecast, and they were doing a poor job of it. Basically, forecasting for them was plotted on a graph: short-term forecasting 6-inch ruler, long-term forecasting 12-inch ruler, and just put a ruler through the data and then extend it. And that was it. And I thought to myself, well, there must be a better way of doing this. There must be a mathematical theory of forecasting, and I'm in a good position, better than most, to exploit that. So the 7 years ahead forecast was basically to do the 7 years was extending the telephone exchanges, but it was really to do with the fact that it took that long to commission an extension on the telephone exchange. So one of the lessons I learned early on was don't forecast if you don't have to. And rather than forecasting 7 years ahead, which was very difficult to do, much better to try and make the process more robust, so that you don't, so it doesn't take 7 years to put in a telephone exchange extension. You can do that, and eventually that penny dropped, and management realised this, and they worked on that instead, and got the time taken down from 7 years to 18 months, which meant we were forecasting things that were really quite forecastable, and the forecasts were accurate. The 30 years ahead was the theory behind it was that you might want to know in advance, are we going to need to buy the car park next door? Um, it was never used, and both were unachievable. But the forecasting process was a mess. Meanwhile, I retook my exam and I got myself a degree in 1978. But I realized the value of statistics and I started reading up in my spare time. The process was a mess. So, for example, I discovered that we would forecast. We would produce a forecast and then we would hand it over the fence to the engineers, who were a completely separate department, and we didn't talk to the engineers much. And before we handed over our forecasts, we would add 20% just for contingency. And then I discovered it accidentally in a casual conversation with an engineer that they were also adding 20% because they didn't know about our 20%. So this should have been flagged up, but nobody did. The result was we were putting in far too much capacity. Nobody really noticed or cared, because if you put in too much capacity, what that means is the exchange exhausts later than you thought it would, which nobody really pays much attention to unless the accountants were really on the job and looking at, are we over investing? If on the other hand you didn't put in enough capacity in, things would get very serious. People would not be able to make phone calls, and so it was vastly more important to not block the calls, but overinvestment wasn't something we worried about. The organisation didn't care about profits at all. It was a government department, so that they really weren't particularly bothered. So the moral I learned pretty soon was, don't forecast if you don't have to. Better to make the resulting response process more robust, if you can. Depends on the situation, obviously. So I got promoted after a couple of years, and I thought, well, career move. Probably the most exciting place to be at the moment is being a programmer. I've got an A level in computer science, but being trained as a professional programmer, I think that's something as a long-term career move is going to be very important. And the same is true these days. If you can't if you're doing something like forecasting these days, there will be some module that does it's part of the IT stack, and if you can't talk the language of the software engineers in charge of the IT stack, then you don't get a seat at the table and you won't be able to change anything. A year or so later, two statisticians turned up at our office. I was a programmer then. So some of my colleagues were chatting with them. There was a marketing management information system being built called MEMIS, and they wanted to include a forecasting module. So the statisticians belonged to a thing called the Management Science Consultancy Unit, which I'd never heard of. So there was a statistical unit out there, which was news to me. And these guys were specifying the module to do the sales forecasting, and they wrote their own code. So I buttonholed these guys, having had an interest in statistics, and I was studying statistics at night by myself. And I introduced myself, made them explain their novel Bayesian method. Now, I'd got as far as Bayesian methods, and I thought, well, this is one bit of statistics that I really like as a mathematician. It's elegant. That is to say, it's both beautiful and powerful, and it covers a lot of cases. It's a coherent theory of statistics. I really liked it. But Bayesian statistics was, in those days, was considered an eccentricity, an oddity. It was a minority view of people. And there were serious computational problems if you wanted to take it beyond toy examples. So you had to do an integral for every an integral was dependent on the size of the problem. So if you had a model that had 15 parameters, you had to do a 15-dimensional integral. Now, back in these days, in the early 80s, you could run a 15-dimensional integral on a workstation costing £50,000, and it would take a couple of hours. It was kind of the limit of what you could do really in the way of computing. So it was right on the edge, but it wasn't for big scale. It didn't scale at all well, but it was very interesting. So I took a great interest in how their method worked in some detail. Then they started doing testing, and BT was divided into 10 different regions, and this was scheduled to run in a 2-hour batch slot overnight for all 10 regions. Well, we ran it for one region, and it took an hour. So we thought it was going to take something like 10 hours to run in the overnight batch slot, and this was a big problem because we only had a 2-hour slot. It was written in a language that nobody around used. In the IT department, we were using COBOL, which is the common business-oriented language of the time. Nobody knew how the algorithm worked when the statisticians tried to explain it. Nobody understood a word they said. Somehow, the head of section heard that I knew how it worked. He called me into his office and he said, "How does this thing work?" I was unable to explain it to him in simple enough words. I said, "But that's not the problem. The problem isn't that the algorithm is really complicated. The problem is that they're not using a compiled language. They've written in interpreted BASIC, and that's totally unsuitable as a language. What it needs is to be rewritten in a compiled language." And he didn't understand much of what I was saying, but he wasn't a technical guy at all. And he said, "Do you know how to fix it?" I said, "Yes, it needs to be rewritten in Fortran and the output sent to our COBOL program and our database." And he said, "Right, you're doing it. You're going to make it." He had a habit of saying, if you told him it took a certain length of time to do something, he would give you a shorter time. If you said it takes 5 months to do something, he'll tell you to do it in one. He was that sort of a guy. And it's part of the way he worked. He just he thought he was pushing people to work a bit harder. He told me to make it run 10 times faster. I'd actually seen the code. I knew I could make it work a lot better than that. And when I actually finished it, it ran 60 times faster. So he was very pleased with me. I got a nice bonus. The statisticians basically signed me up to join their department. Said, "Do you want to come and join us permanently?" And I said, "Oh yes, please." So I became a statistician. I made several friends there. They helped me to get a permanent job. Initially, I was seconded for 2 years, but friends there helped me to get a job as a statistician. So I was in the statistics department doing stuff that was more interesting than the stuff I'd been doing before. I didn't really enjoy the programming that much. So I worked in the management science consultancy unit for 9 years. And we were a consultancy that was free to, we were a group function, free to go anywhere in the BT group of companies, helping them out. And BT was privatized in 1984. It was the most horrendously inefficient organization. So there was lots of scope to improve the processes and get things working more efficiently. And senior managers were paying attention to things like efficiency for the first time. So despite not having a good degree, I talked my way onto a part-time MSc at the Polytechnic Central London. And I did, it was a lightweight stats degree. It was very practical oriented, not much maths, which wasn't a problem for me because I'd read most of the theory. I was familiar with most of the theory. I didn't actually need to learn the theory. What I wanted was practical applications of tools and techniques. And, how do you do a principal components analysis rather than read a book about it, and give you some examples. So I graduated in 1993. The organization had renamed itself the University of Westminster. So I now had an MSc, although not a very statistically theory-heavy one. But it looked good on my CV, and I had plenty of practice, and I used it in BT to great effect. So I had a nice toolkit coming out of that. They also signed me up and said, "Look, we've got an MBA course that has a quantitative module. The MBA students have to take a quantitative module, and we'd like somebody to teach that." would you like to be a visiting lecturer? The only other applicant we've had is somebody who passed the course last year, and successfully, but that's all he knows. He knows the course material and nothing else. Whereas with a master's degree in statistics and having been interested in it for several years, you've got a much wider knowledge base. So I taught quantitative module on the MBA course for a couple of years, and I realised teaching's harder than it looks. So at one point, the marketing department came along and they said, at the moment, as you phone calls cost different amounts depending on what time of day it is. So 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. we charge the highest because that's the busiest part. Then in the afternoons to 6 o'clock we charge a lower price, and then after 6 o'clock back to 8 a.m. we charge the lowest of all. We'd like to make a flat rate, so the call costs the same whatever time of day it is. Trouble is, no senior engineer will sign it off because either it works, in which case nobody notices, or it fails and the network hasn't got enough capacity, and this particular engineer is seen as the scapegoat. So no engineer would risk his reputation for to sign it off. I knew from my forecasting experience the network was over-engineered. There was loads of capacity, so I collected a whole bunch of data to show that it was over capacity, and I wrote the quantitative part of the business case that the marketing department and wanted, and we got the flat rate tariffs across the whole day implemented, despite the engineers breathing in through clenched teeth, and there were no capacity problems. It didn't cause any capacity problems, so I really didn't expect it to. So, unfortunately, the management side consultancy unit eventually fell into the hands of, through various reorganisations, in the hands of somebody who didn't see it as a stewardship role, and he didn't value it at all. He just thought there's a head count there that I can get, and they will. They can implement my new idea. I've seen in the Harvard Business Review that dashboards are the thing. So I just want people to make dashboards for me. The professional staff, including myself, were up in arms, and almost everybody left. I went to the research department. The MSTU was abolished about a year later, and I think the statistics profession, this is my moral, is largely invisible. It doesn't appear on organisation charts. If it's not valued by senior management. It's valued by lots of people at the sharp end who had real problems that we helped with, but top management didn't see it as an essential component of an efficient organisation. They valued quality, but they didn't really value statistics and the statistics profession. And to some extent, when the first academic grants were starting to be put out for AI, for example, the money started to go to computer scientists rather than the statistics profession, and it took a bit of work by the RSS to get the right share of money and to get the appropriate appreciation. But we're not so good at publicising ourselves as the computer scientists, so you have to be seen and seen to have value. I guess that's my motto there. So I went to the research department, the data mining group, the latest buzzword. Basically, computer scientists wanted to get into doing data analysis, or most of data analysis. Some bits they wanted, and some bits they didn't wanted. But it was a fashionable area of computer scientists. So computer science. I was there in a fashionable area which had 3 years research money to play with to see what we could make of it, and various things that statisticians have been doing for years, like clustering and forecasting, change detection, were rebadged as this new data mining area, and it was very fashionable, and there was plenty of money for it, so people were interested. Eventually, the money ran out. They didn't pursue it, and the research department steered itself in a different direction. The internet was suddenly becoming the big thing, and we needed a lot more internet engineers. So lots of people were retrained as internet engineers. However, I didn't want to be an internet engineer. I wanted to be a statistician still. And my managers saw the fact that I had a stream of customers, all of whom were very happy with what I was doing. And where would statistical consulting go if I was retrained as an internet engineer? So they let me keep doing it on my own inside an engineering department. So as long as I gave them some tidbits, they were happy. So, for example, I did quite a lot of work on network performance, which was very stats heavy, and I knew traffic theory, queuing theory, and things like that the engineers had an immediate use for. So I was able to hide from the threat of being an internet engineer, and I had quite a steady stream of customers. Um, there was plenty of money for doing PhDs, so I signed up for a PhD at Goldsmiths. I wanted one in statistics. BT wanted it in data mining. It never that was a permanent issue. It didn't go at all well. The maths group, where I was in the stats group at Goldsmiths, we were so small we were considered non-viable. So the maths and stats group went over to Queen Mary, my old alma mater. The PhD I got an MPhil in Bayesian statistics, which immediately entitled me to have Chartered Statistician. So it could have gone better, but I think it was designed to fail at the outset. There was a problem there. Anyway, so I got an MPhil, so I got one master's by coursework and one by research, and I've got Chartered Statistician. So things are looking up. The Chartered Statistician, Chartered Statistician was nobody. There was no Chartered Statistician in BT. They'd never heard of such a thing, because the statistics profession is invisible. Lots of people were chartered engineers, but and people were the chartered equivalent in the British Computer Society, but that was about it. So things came to a head. So in 1987, a few years earlier, the accountants had come along and said, well, look, we've got all this copper in the ground in the form of telephone cables. They're assets, and we have to pay rates on assets, and we have to report the assets in the BT report accounts, which are audited, obviously. How do we go about assessing the amount of copper in the ground? And the Management Science Consultancy Unit, before they got wound up, had devised this sample-based method where you chose a sample of exchanges. It was a stratified random sample, and they had maps of all the cables, and you'd go around the cable. You use a little wheel to measure the length of the cable. You take a sample of the cables, and you could work out. You could gross all the figures up to the total, and because it was a sample and because we understood sampling theory, we could put a confidence interval on that. And it went into the BT report and accounts. And that went on for several years until 1999, when a senior engineer left BT, and he went along to the Valuation Office Agency, which levies the rates, and these rates were a lot. And he said BT uses a crappy method for estimating the amount of copper in the assets in the ground. They use a sample. Now, in his mind, a sample was something like a straw poll. It was not a scientific methodology at all. It was just a kind of a finger in the air, as far as he was concerned. And the Valuation Office Agency immediately doubled BT's rates on the copper assets from 150 million pounds per year to 300 million. BT took the Valuation Office to court, not surprisingly, and a very high-powered legal team, led not just by a QC, but by a law lord. If you remember the days before the Supreme Court, we had the House of Lords as our Supreme Court. And a law lord was assembled to fight this thing. And at some point, somebody asked me about the sample-based method. How sound is it? I said, well, I wasn't involved in that, but there must be some documentation. He said, oh, yes, there's documentation. And he gave me a stack of 4-ring binders. And he said, there you go. It's absolutely full of Greek letters. We don't understand a word of it. We can't make any sense of it, and neither can the legal team. I said, sure. So I went through it over the next week or so. And it was a standard stratified, two-stage stratified random sample. Standard bookwork, as far as I was concerned. Nothing to worry about. I asked about how it had been done in practice, and I got reassuring answers. And after a couple of weeks, I said to the accountant, whose name is Anil, I said, Anil, it's fine. This is defensible. And he said, would you stand up in court and defend it? I said, yeah. So the message went back to the legal team, and they said, great result, Blaise, but we got like a law lord in charge of the legal team, and you don't have enough gravitas to stand up in court. And we believe you, but we'd like somebody with more gravitas. I said, that's no problem. I was anticipating that question. I will go to the Royal Statistical Society Register of Consultants, and I will get you. So I will act as an honest broker, and I will get you a statistician who's got more gravitas than myself, who will stand up in court. As it happened, I was fortunate enough that Professor Vic Barnett had just retired from, I think was it Sheffield University? I'm not sure. But he'd written a book on sampling theory. He had 200 research papers to his name, and he was happy to be consulted on to take on a job as consultancy. I said, I've only got one requirement, Vic, and that's if we write any code, I have to write it, because when you go away, I have to be able to understand it and defend it and so forth. He repeated my analysis of the he read all the documentation. He spoke to the people who'd implemented it. He came to the same conclusion as me. It was perfectly sound, perfectly defensible in court. And we worked on this together, basically exploring different options. And then he asked a question that I hadn't anticipated. He said, if they're not going to use this method, what are they going to use? What's their planned method? And I must admit, I hadn't investigated that. So we got to look at their proposed method, and it was rubbish. So Vic wrote a very detailed hatching job on it. We sent that off to the customer, and that eventually got to the opposition, the legal team, and we were due to be in court on the Monday, and on the Sunday night they rang up and said they were caving in. They weren't presenting any evidence to the High Court. So the High Court, the High Court said, right, you're going to reduce BT's rates by £150 million immediately, and you're going to pay out £250 million back pay, which is because of the time it's taken to come to court. A couple of days later, my general manager emailed me to say that the Financial Times was reporting that BT's share price had gone up several points due to a favourable court case on to do with taxes, and we moved the share point. We moved the share price, which I have to say never occurred to me, and I've never done since. But it was all good news, and I got a thumping great bonus that year, and very nice result. But why did it come about? It came about because the lack of understanding amongst about the senior engineer and the valuation office agency about statistics. They didn't consult a statistician. If they'd consulted a statistician at an early stage, they would realise that what this engineer was telling them was false. One of the things that I've seen very often is where people don't understand the role of the sampling fraction in a sample, which is to do with, if you're only taking a sample of 300, so exchanges, and there are 5,500 exchanges in total. How is that a reliable result? And that notion that it doesn't depend on the sampling fraction, but it depends on the absolute number, basically, uh, uh, it isn't widely understood amongst the layman, and somebody must have racked up a hell on both sides a big legal bill, which was completely unnecessary. If only they'd understood sampling theory a bit more. So sampling theory is not well understood. It's one of the things that the layman misunderstands. Um, so after the court case in 2000, as far as senior management is concerned, I was Mr. Statistics in BT. If you want to ask a question about stats, go talk to Blaise. And so people would come along and say, look, I'm going to send this report off to Ofcom. It's got a sample in it. Is the sample size big enough? It was the usual way it was expressed, and I would come back and say, usually it's not the sample size, because people tend to be generous on that size if they're engineers, but it's how was it taken? Well, I'm looking for biases rather than a small sample size. So I was pretty much allowed to do what I want. I was a roving. I had a unique job. I was a roving statistician for the last 25 years of my career. And forecasting on the core name, and in the core of the network, you've got various bearers, various cables. And they were forecasting the cables, and they were doing it badly. So I could see that they were using just 10 weeks data, and they were forecasting 26 weeks out. And the data was pretty variable, and the forecasting was done inside a spreadsheet using the Excel trend function. Now, Excel trend function is linear regression, simple linear regression. And I was trying to explain that you were this small amount of data, just 10 weeks, to forecast 26 weeks ahead. You were waggling a very long stick, basically. That's why it was so variable. You only had a small amount of data, and linear regression is very vulnerable to outliers. So the problem was the variability of the data. You need something that was much more resistant to small changes. So I use a pretty basic time series method called Holt's method, where you're taking weighted averages of the data, and you're weighting down the distant past more than you are the recent past. But senior management thought that the issue was, it must be that they're not taking seasonality into account. So I spent as long convincing senior management that their model of what was going wrong was wrong, as I did actually implementing the more reliable method. So I could implement Holt's method using various proprietary software, but I thought it'd be a much better solution if we could actually embed that into their spreadsheet. So all they had to do was, instead of using the trend function, they would use a user-defined function that we'd put together that did Holt's method. So I don't speak VBA, which is the programming language inside Excel, but I did have a colleague who was very good at it, and Stephen wrote the Holt's method to my spec, and it was a one-to-one. Just take out the trend function in your formula and put in the Holt function that we'd written. And we worked out the business case. It saved BT £4 million a year straight off the bat, just by using a sensible method. But it goes to the fact that engineers come out of university with engineering degrees, or software engineers come out with computing degrees, and yet they're all considered interchangeable with one another. There's still the old civil service cult of the amateur. Why weren't the people who are responsible for forecasting millions of pounds worth of kit given forecasting courses? Why were they left to sort of use whatever they wanted? Where's the professionalism there? You induct people into things you need them to do, and they hadn't been on any forecasting courses. And some people will teach themselves forecasting if they need it. Others will just do what seems sensible, but it's very amateurish. So there's a problem there with the way in induction of engineers into companies. I don't think BT is in any way unusual for this. And there was another one where the broadband was being rolled out with the help of some government money. I say with some government money. The thing about broadband, or at least copper broadband, is that it's very cheap to wire up apartment buildings. So densely populated areas are cheap. So places like Singapore can roll out broadband to everywhere because it's all densely populated. But in Britain, you're going to get the cities are all very cheap uh, to wire up. When it comes to the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, you're in a completely different league. It costs a fortune. So BT money was being supplemented. BT's own investor was being supplemented by grants from government for the hard to reach places. And BT, alone amongst the competing companies that provide broadband, had the universal service obligation. If somebody asked for broadband, we had to provide it. And the with copper, the distance decline the distance determines the broadband speed. It declines with speed. That's not true of fiber, but it is true of copper. So, did we need to know that we needed to know the premises to exchange distances, and the records created by the old post office were not very good, and the computer system if it knows that there is service at a certain location, then it tries to figure out what would probably have been the route of the cable because there is no records, and it will say, well, it will go along the under the pavements, so it won't go in a straight line from one to the other. It will go under the pavements along the roads between one and the other. It was basically take an intelligent guess. But we got some survey data, which was saying that for a random sample of large random sample of houses, we can actually tell you the real distances. And I did regression analysis to find rules to generalize that to larger population. And I was able to show that the distances were generally less than people were assuming between the premises and the exchanges and the cabinets in the streets. So as a result of the distances being shorter, the build costs for extending it out further, extending out broader, would come down. So it saved BT. That regression analysis, which took me about 2 weeks or so, saved BT about £20 million. Because the expensive bit of providing broadband is not the electronics. It's digging up the roads. It's digging a trench, laying a duct, what they call the civil engineering side. That's where you spend the money, rather than the costs of the equipment by comparison are quite small. But we found that we didn't have to do so much digging up, didn't need so many cabinets and ducts, and we saved 20 million quid for 2 weeks of regression analysis and sampling theory. Another thing I did was I got group HR involved with things I was doing. So they wanted to be very sure that they were being very fair that the women were being disadvantaged as regards men, different ethnicities, job sharers disadvantaged. What about disabled? What about part-timers? Which division you're in. So I was given anonymized data on all the employees, and I concentrated on people who got rated as very good on their annual appraisal. And I did a big logistic regression to say what's the chances of your getting a very good given all these predictors, your sex, your age, your ethnicities, whether you're a part-timer or a full-timer. I was happy to see that the sexes were treated equally. except that if you looked at the outstanding grade, they were dominated by males. But as far as the very good grade was concerned, my logistic regression said that women were being treated well. The age shape was an interesting one. It was like a parabola, so you were unlikely as a joiner to get marked very good. But by the time you reached about 40 or so, you were at your peak, and then it slowly declined with age. Um, there were differences with ethnicities, and I was able to pick out which ones they were and how much worse off they were. And this led to a rollout of compulsory training for all people managers for cultural awareness to make sure you weren't missing out on things like uh, um, and they focused on things like if people stare, if people don't look you in the eye, you might perceive that as shifty, but it's a mark of respect in certain cultures and so forth. Which division in BT you're in did turn out to be quite significant. So you're being judged by different criteria in different departments. So Group HR are very happy with the EDI stuff. So that's still relevant today. I'll certainly I've used a lot of data visualization because Group HR mostly weren't terribly maths aware people. So they were, whereas engineers see Greek symbols as meaning, oh, this is solid stuff. I like this. This is good. The HR people were usually humanities and arts graduates, and showing them mathematics just made them nervous. Uh, there was a case of a liability. Some if you fail to meet the service level requirement, if you fail to if BT makes a contract with a customer, they don't do it on the right time scale, then then they breach the service level agreement, and there's a penalty payment. There are some exceptions to that. One is if, for example, the council says you can't dig up that road to build a new duct, you're going to have to change your date. Then the customer is deemed to have consented to the date being moved because it's beyond BT's control. So the deemed consents were being handed out too liberally. There was an accounting liability of unknown size. The chief financial officer went to a well-known firm of management consultants to estimate the liability. And they decided to take a random sample of orders and use it to estimate the proportion. So they would go through the orders manually and see whether the DC had been allocated correctly or not. And they would give the proportion of incorrectly processed orders and hence the liability to an accuracy of plus or minus percentage points. Months after she got her report, the chief financial officer shared the sample details to the head of data science in BT's research department, who happens to be a friend of mine. And he said, Blaise, I don't know a lot about sampling theory. Could you take a look at it? I took a look at it and I didn't like it. I said, basically, Delif, what they've done is they've said in their report they're going to take a simple random sample, and they've chosen the sample size to correspond with a simple random sample. But it's obvious from reading their report and the methodology that they haven't taken a simple random sample, they've taken a cluster sample. They take it, there may be multiple orders from one customer, so the customer is a cluster, and you need to know about the correlation within the cluster, and the results of a cluster sample are less accurate than the results of a simple random sample. We reported that to the chief financial officer, and she was very unhappy. She paid a lot of money to a well-known firm of management consultants, and they are not cheap, and they'd done it wrong. The next day, I got a call from the head of data science at said management consultancy, and she said to me, "Yeah, I put my hand up. We definitely got it wrong. I'm an econometrician, got a PhD in economics, but I'm not a statistician. I just took a stats book off my shelf and I looked up sample size calculation, and that's what I told my guys to do. Um, so that didn't used to happen. It used to be the management consultancy used to have a chief statistician, and he or she was normally a very experienced statistician. The average consultant they have will be an MBA. They've done a quant module. They know a bit about statistics, but they also know that if they get out of their depth, they go to the chief statistician. They don't try and do it themselves. It looks like it's all being bundled as data analysis these days, and it's usually a computer scientist rather than a statistician who's got that head of data analysis, or in this case, an econometrician with a not such good knowledge of statistics, it seems. So that's a change where senior management are unaware of that. That role has been downgraded. So I think that's an issue for the statistical profession to worry about. Yeah, so there is this thing called data science, which has come out of the computer science profession, which is very good at marketing itself, and data science, data mining, and now AI. And this data science, when you unpick it, it has a few holes in it as far as the statistician is concerned. A lot of people can just take a forecasting program now. Microsoft Profit is given away free. Shove it in the IT stack and it'll do you a good job. But there's widespread ignorance about certain specific things like design of experiments. Stratified random sampling is not something that's taught under the AI rubric or the machine learning rubric. Samples and surveys generally, how samples and surveys are conducted and the biases that they have, it's fallen out of the data science area. It's not being included. So, and statisticians have a role to play. The other thing is that they employ engineers, and these are either computer science graduates, software engineers, or engineering graduates, electrical or mechanical or whatever. And they're now finding themselves in situations they were not trained for, where they're getting large amounts of data to deal with statistically, and they haven't been trained to how to go about it. If you want to teach them, there's a big difference between the machine learning computer science types and the traditional engineers, because the engineering grads can do algebra and calculus. Computing graduates, their maths is more discrete maths, so things like graph theory. I once asked my audience, because I used to give an annual talk on the data science as part of the data science course that we ran every year out of the research department. And I once said, hands up who knows or was once supposed to know what an eigenvalue is. And about 2 out of 30 people said they did. And of course, eigenvalues, eigenvectors, if you want to teach multivariate statistics, you need the linear algebra. So linear algebra and calculus are what you need. Some people have it, some people don't. Some of your traditional the assumption that all your engineers, in quotes, are interchangeable is not a good assumption. We need to get more mathematical capability into the data science area. Now, all the RSS stuff does have that, but there are other people giving out certificates as well. So that's really where I'm coming from. If I can, don't know if there are any questions, or how are we doing for time? Hello? Anybody know how we're doing for time? Well, we scheduled till 3 o'clock.
Yes, Blaise, we have 5 more minutes until 3.
Okay. Anybody got any questions?
Can I just say, Blaise, fascinating massive examples. Thanks very much for that. I think the expert witness one was particularly good, but all of your examples with the money, that the influence of the money is just enormous, isn't it? That the effect of the statistical thinking It's just so powerful.
Yes.
And yet it's curious how it must be just something about statistics that puts people off trying to understand it, even though the payback is so massive. What do you think?
I agree. I just keep thinking that we're invisible. There's nowhere on the organization chart that says the stats department, even quality improvement managers. But they used to promote Six Sigma in a big way. But that's when the AI thing came along. Uh, they just dropped the Six Sigma. This is the new one, and then assumed that AI would do everything. And there's a lot of people assuming we just have to buy the appropriate software, stick it into the IT stack, and these problems will go away. And I actually once ran a talk, which was called "How to Get Fired Using Data Mining," and I would say you promise the finance department you do all these wonderful things with this clever software, and then you discover that the data is bad. What is the quality of the data that you are basing this on? And it can all go, it can all go bad. Sorry, Nigel.
Yes. Hi, Blake. Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly.
Yeah, no. Great presentation. I was actually getting quite annoyed at you talking about my career instead of your career. But you and I can echo each other on so many levels. And
Right.
for information, I'm going to email you a presentation I gave about 10 years ago at Open University, not dissimilar to what you've done. I think you'll be interested in it. But about the sampling one, it's interesting you have that expert witness case, because I do a lot of expert witness in sampling, and it just time and time again it just comes up. People who are quantitative, thinking they know how to select a sample, but not
Yes.
realizing the sheer scope of the subject.
Yes.
And I just don't quite know what the solution is, frankly. I think it's a little. Would you agree? It's almost like a little learning to dangerous thing here. Is that
Yes.
your?
Yes.
That's my question.
Okay, Martin. Martin, you got your hand up. Can you hear me? Yeah. On that sampling fraction issue, I do know BT lost a previous court case because a sample had been taken and it wasn't a high proportion of the of the population, and a judge rejected it on that explicit basis, and nobody corrected him because BT was actually correct. But the engineers didn't know enough about sampling to argue with the judge. Yes.
Doesn't surprise me at all, Blaise. Doesn't surprise me. So, I think Martin must be on mute if he's not asking his question.
Martin, can you hear us? Yes, Martin. Martin is on mute.
Yeah, okay. Makes sense.
Okay.
While we're waiting for Martin, could I ask another question? Who will carry on the baton now for you at BT, or will it just fade at the moment until another crisis sort of comes along and someone steps up?
Yelena, you need to identify yourself.
Hi, hello.
This is falling to you, Yelena.
Yes, how are you guys? How are you, Blaise? I missed your talk when you were leaving, and when I saw it advertised, I said I must go and listen to you. You're definitely dearly missed, and I have been thinking of you very often when we have a lot of questions coming our way. So yes, I try to create a statistical insights team, in data science part of BT. Blaise, I must tell you that I had to rename the team into Data Science Insight because of constant reorgs. I was told this word statistician, they're like data scientists. So we are now statisticians hiding under the hood of data scientists. So
Yes,
we are
I used to
still
hide
there.
under the data mining hood. Yes, 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 you have to hide the label because statistics is invisible. Senior management,
Yes.
it has a negative connotation. People think I like accountants, but more boring. You know,
Yeah.
they just add up columns of numbers or something. You know, but there is no real appreciation
It
of statistics
definitely
apart from
it's yeah, sorry,
yeah.
let's yeah, definitely there is no appreciation, and I do see now how difficult your work was to actually make a difference. And I think the only way to keep statistics relevant, not relevant, it's relevant, it's just visible to the others, shamelessly to advertise all the successes that are done through statistical work. Because, we can debate here what was the return on investment in data science teams and the data science, machine learning in general in big companies compared to clever and well run statistical analysis. I think I know which one would win.
Yeah, there used to be lots of software advertised in the days of data mining in the 90s, and when they would say, compared to traditional statistical techniques, our new neural network is much better. And I would always look at this and get annoyed and say, what do you mean compared to traditional statistical techniques? What about cutting edge statistical techniques?
Yeah.
How does it compare against those? You know,
So
show
yeah.
me your neural network and I'll show you a generalized additive model. You know,
So yes, many thanks for the talk. It's really insightful.